Hello, and welcome to the Turning Toward Being podcast. It's a podcast associated with a journal called the Journal for Ontological Inquiry and Education, or JOIE for short. And I have with me two people, Sean Meehan and Walter Jost, and I'm going to share their biographies real quick before we get started. Sean Ross Meehan is the author of A Liberal Education in Late Emerson, Readings in the Rhetorical Mind from 2019, and Mediating American Autobiography, Autobiography and Photography in Emerson, Thoreau, Douglass, and Whitman from 2008. He's the co-editor of Approaches to Teaching the Works of Ralph Waldo Emerson in the MLA's Approaches to Teaching series. He received his PhD in English from the University of Iowa and his BA from Princeton University. Sean is professor of English and director of writing at Washington College in Maryland, where he has taught American literature and nonfiction writing and supervised the general education writing program for the past 18 years. He's recently taken on a new role at the college, Associate Dean for Curricular Innovation, and is facilitating a college-wide curricular revision and renewal project. And at St. Louis University, Walter Jost studied with Walter Ong and graduated with a BA in English in 1973. Then at the University of Chicago, he took an MA in English in 1974, an MA in General Studies in the Humanities in 1979, and received his PhD at Chicago in 1985 from the Committee on Analysis of Ideas and Studies, the Study of Methods, where he studied with Wayne Booth, Wendy Olmsted, and Stephen Toulmin. He has taught at the University of Virginia since 1983 for 10 years in its now defunct Department of Rhetoric and Communication Studies, then in the English department, where he's currently a professor. Over his career, Walter has co-edited 5 collections that brought together scholars in rhetoric, philosophy, theology, religion, and literature, edited 2 collections of the published papers of Wayne Booth, and authored 3 books, most recently, All in All, More or Less, with Palgrave in 2025. And currently, Walter's working on and hopes to publish next year a book extending the pluralist rhetoric of the philosopher Richard McKeon. Okay, and with that,
Hello.
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 So yeah,
Thank you, Drew. Yeah,
what we're
go ahead.
focusing on is this book, All in All, More or Less, and Sean, I'll hand it to you for getting us started.
Well, thanks, Drew, and Walter. Thanks for being here. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you after giving your work, your book, and your work leading up to the book such thought and consideration. Drew, I'm going to steal a figure from you in an earlier communication that this book, I think. I thought it was fascinating. It's like opening a backpack and looking into another galaxy, right? So there's this kind of familiar work here. I mean, this is a scholar in Walter Jost who's deeply engaged in the study and the history of rhetoric and has had a huge influence on my work and others. Um, and yet this book also, so it's familiar and also huge, big, both quantity and in its quality and its aim. So, Walter, I thought we'd start generally and kind of work our way into that backpack, so to speak. So I'm interested to have you share with us how you articulate the kind of larger aims of the book, maybe starting with how you'd situated this project with prior work, the study and teaching of rhetoric, ordinary language criticism, all the way back to your starting point with rhetoric, rhetorical thought in John Henry Newman, your earlier book, Rhetorical Investigations. I mean, really a rich kind of foreground to this. So help our audience kind of think about that.
Yeah, it was probably in 2017 or 18. It occurred to me, I kind of want to know what all this rhetoric I've been doing literally adds up to. It's like, I wonder what this all adds up to. Of course, I had notions but my previous book was published in 2004. So, it wasn't like I wasn't doing anything. I was thinking and writing, but I hadn't put it all together. I think that I don't know if that's typical of you guys too. I always have trouble writing a paper. To me, to write a paper is really difficult because I want to go in a lot of places at once. Rhetoric really allows you to do that. So that was the initial impetus, is what does this all add up to? I'm thinking going all the way back. I was an English major at St. Louis University, and my first real interests were in poetry. And I read a lot of poetry. I wrote poetry. And I studied with Walter Ong, whom I had just enormous respect for, not only as a scholar. I don't think I was probably very deep into his scholarship, although I had looked at some of his stuff. But as a person, he was remarkable, just a remarkable human being. Um, but I went to U of Chicago for an MA in English. And I did get into the PhD program in English, but at that time, I think it was money and who knows what it was. I decided not to go on. I know what it was. It had to do certainly with money, but also with it felt confining. English to me felt confined. I think that's wrong. I think I was wrong to think that. That was a mistake. English is plenty big for anybody. But for me, it felt like I would have to give up reading other things that I wanted to read. So it was after that year in English, that MA English, that I had taken a course with Wayne Booth, and by then, of course, had run into this word rhetoric. And then just that summer, I think it was, Booth's Modern Dogma and the Rhetoric of Assent came out. At least I remember getting it that summer of 74. And so then bells started to go off a little bit, but only very intuitively and vaguely. I didn't particularly know what rhetoric was about, but I was very attracted to his book, not least because his title, Modern Dogma, the Rhetoric of Assent, was itself a riff on John Henry Newman's an essay in aid of a grammar of assent. Well, as it happened, I knew that Newman work because at St. Louis U, a Catholic institution, I had taken a course in Newman. We didn't do the grammar, but we did the apologia and I think the development of Christian doctrine. But when I saw that with Booth and then put that together with rhetoric, then things began to vibrate. But again, very sub rosa. It wasn't explicit at all. It was only a few years later, when I had continued to read just as much as I could, that I realized it was beginning to go in one ear and out the other. It's like I had to have a structure to get a grip on all of this. Otherwise, I was really at risk of just, kind of being mindless about it. And that's when I decided to go back and first go into general studies in the humanities, which gave me that little more scope. And then ideas and methods was, in a way, a perfect place for me. It was very small. Almost nobody was there. But the people, Wendy Olmsted, Charles Wagner, and David Smigelskis, those three in particular, but also David Tracy and Wayne Booth, and affiliated faculty, Eugene Genlin, this brilliant psychologist and psychotherapist. Those people were, it was a great experience. It was very hard, and I always felt out of my depth. But um, then I began to put things together. People before me, like James Casterly, had been there. Eugene Garver had been there, and I was getting to know their work. And a lot of the emphasis, probably Booth's influence, was in ethics, kind of ethical readings of literature, which is great. And that's where I started to try to think about rhetoric, but it didn't feel right to me ultimately. It's like I wanted to get at some intellectual component, but not through ethics. Not that I had any problem with that, but it just didn't feel right. And that's when I remembered Newman and Booth's mention, not only his use of the title, but his mention of, I think, the grammar of assent in the preface to that book. I think it is. I haven't looked at it forever. Then a light went off. It's like, wait a minute. Newman looks very rhetorical to me. And that's when I began that work. the impetus of that, to make it short a little bit, was I wanted to become good at disciplines like rhetoric and grammar. And I mean, ideas and methods was just perfect. It gave me what I didn't know that I wanted, but what I wanted to be able to handle disciplines so that I could handle a lot of subject matters rather than, be 19th century Victorian
Mm.
literature, which, in another life I would have been. Um, and again, it's idiosyncratic. It's just where I felt kind of alive, was trying to struggle with lots of different things. So, rhetoric from then on was the thread. Um, and in a serious way, I feel like I've just had one thought, which has to do with rhetoric says the world is indeterminate and can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. And, that's been a thread all the way through. So when I got over the last several years, I had written a couple of what came to be chapters in All, but I hadn't had that book in mind in the least. And then maybe I was just getting old enough to go, wait a minute, let's really take stock and see what this all adds up to. Yeah.
I want to pick one thread, Drew, and then maybe before you ask a question here, but because I think we might return to this, Walter, a little bit later. But I mean, I'm hearing you. First of all, I mean, I think the educational background you provide it fascinated me in reading your book. It's you use a phrase through the book of a kind of rhetoric as resolutely contextual, and I think you do that well. There's this lengthy footnote early on that I was fascinated with that recounts some of the history of your study. But is it fair to say that particularly the way you were talking about your doctoral studies at Chicago, that you were looking to specialize in generalism? I mean, is that what rhetoric allows you to do in some way?
Yeah, that's the easiest way to say it, to
Yeah,
specialize in generalism.
yeah,
Um,
That's what I did.
yeah. Well, if you're a rhetorician, that's what you did.
yeah,
One way or another, that's what you did, because that's
yeah.
what you have to do to do it. And I remember I stayed friends with Walter Ong for until his death. We weren't terribly close, but every time I went to St. Louis, I would try to visit with him. And I remember once he wrote me in a letter. He said something like, you have to know a lot to do rhetoric. So, but all you can do then is do what you do and put in your oar and see what happens. And I think that's right. I think it's not any kind of a shortcut to anything. If anything, it's a long way around
Mhm.
doing it that way,
The low
including,
road.
I'm sorry.
The low road.
Yeah,
It's kind of like
it's a low slog all the way around. But we love rhetorics, and it's it's eye-opening. It's when I went through the Newman book, and I think I have good intuition. I intuit my way forward. But it takes me a long time to figure it out and get it on the page. And oh, that's right. And then when you're on the right track, when things just keep opening up and one leads to another, and you're not hitting brick walls and all of that. And so in a sense, it's a real pleasure. It's a really rigorous, austere kind of pleasure. You guys know this.
Mm, mm. It's so
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
I'm curious because the way that you talk about like not like something you encountered and like it's not time for me to do English now, or it felt confined, whatever. But then later you say, something I think you said clicked.
Yeah, I think so.
But um but in retrospect, looking at that, I wonder, like what because this is what I study, is that is the moment of, and Heidegger might call this the Augenblick, where suddenly you're in another world. In fact, the you that you were familiar with being isn't you anymore, because you're standing in some other place, so to speak,
Yeah.
like another topic. And so
Yeah.
maybe I don't know, but I certainly would love to talk about this. And I don't know, Sean, if this is a good place to do so, but because I think that's one of the key components, this single thought that you're mentioning
It is, and but I've got a kind of a double take on it, and I think maybe this is one way that hermeneutics and rhetoric mutually serve each other, at least the way I do it. Um, that Augenblick is, that's crucial. We all wait for that. That's when you get into the flow and it starts to click and all of that. Um, I can't talk to this deeply, but certainly that Augenblick notion is part of the Romantic tradition, all the way back to Wordsworth's Spots of Time and all of that kind of stuff. And it's important. It's a huge, long tradition. Um, but of course, it does tend to take on a romantic hue. It's like this
Yeah.
moment when the genius has his insight or her insight, and for me, the other half of that is. Caught by Wittgenstein. And I've used this phrase of his in a number of places. He's got a great line. I think it's in his book, Culture and Value, a collection of his writings. He says something like, he says, light dawns gradually over the whole.
Hmm.
Light dawns gradually over the whole. Now, gradual is something like the opposite of the lightning flash or the blink of an eye or whatever it is. And both, it seems to me, are equally important. Um, I wrote I guess it was in my book where I used Robert Frost as my exemplar. We've all heard about epiphanic literature. Modernists were epiphanic writers. You want that big moment which feels irrational and puts everything all together, which I love. And I love all of that stuff. But when you take a lens like that and put it on someone like Robert Frost, he just looks flat. He doesn't do that. Uh, Whatever Wittgenstein's doing with light dawns gradually over the whole, it's not epiphanic. So
Hmm.
what is it? And in a chapter of that earlier book, I tried to topically develop the notion not of an epiphany, but of an epideixis.
Mhm.
So there's Frost poems, not all of them. He's got a couple epiphanic poems, but most of them build accumulatively and gradually. Um, in a minute, when I'm clear thinking, I'll cite a poem for you. Um,
Hmm.
Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. So grief subsides to grief. So Eden, no, sorry. So leaf subsides to leaf. So Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. Now, that's a beautiful epidictic poem. He's got those three examples, right? Leaf, Eden, and dawn goes down today, which is lovely. That's a nice little amplificatory
Hmm.
proof,
Mhm.
and it's a
Exegesis.
gradual dawning of it. It's only 8 lines. It's a tiny poem, but it doesn't work epiphanically. It's not epiphanic. And a
Hmm.
lot of his poems do that, and a lot of other writers write that way. They don't write epiphanic epiphanically. They write epideictically, and they often look bad from out of that modernist lens.
Hmm.
We could talk about Emerson. That would be really interesting to talk about him, because Emerson was Frost's, you know, main guy, one of his main guys, and
Yeah.
that's not an accident. That
Well, and
that
I
tradition is there.
since you invoked Emerson, well, he would call it a low idealism. I don't know if you know that. I mean, I know your phrase is low modernism, but in he defines rhetoric as a low idealism.
Does he use that phrase?
Yeah, he does.
Oh, that's fantastic, because maybe uh, the critic Angus Fletcher uses the term low romanticism,
Yeah, yeah.
and Harold Bloom uses um, some other phrase. It's not low idealism, though, I don't think. It could be. Maybe Bloom got it from Emerson.
Could
Maybe
be.
that's what I'm thinking of.
Well, his figure, I mean, the rhetorical figure I've spent a lot of time with in the essay where he calls it, he's specifically referring to metonymy. He says all thinking is analogizing, and the
Right.
use of life is to learn
Right.
metonymy. So
Yeah.
every and I think I had this in mind, certainly reading and learning about philosophical pluralism in your book and the rhetorical approach to it, which is that any example in Emerson is as good as another potentially, right? In terms of its relation to the whole and
Yeah, that's that everyday and ordinary kind of business.
yeah.
It's
Um,
you can find this stuff anywhere. It's right beneath your feet.
yeah. Well, so on our way to, I definitely, I mean, I think this book is a wonderful, for me, it was an education that someone not trained in philosophy or even in philosophical pluralism, sort of, except by way of some study of Emerson and William James.
Right, right.
But so to on the way there, I wonder if your book is a exploration of philosophy by way of rhetoric, a kind of a tradition in philosophy of philosophical pluralism, but also a kind of reclaiming a rhetorical tradition within that philosophical tradition
Yeah.
of a rhetorical philosophical pluralism. But maybe we should start with how you situate philosophy and rhetoric, where they relate, where they are conflated potentially or in conflict. I mean, how are those two, you know, uh, ways of knowing and being in the world kind of operative in your work?
Yeah, that's a really huge thing. Philosophy, whatever you want to say about it, deals with the whole of things. It deals with the whole. This is what metaphysics is ultimately about. Even if you think metaphysics is bankrupt and it shouldn't ever be done again, philosophy addresses itself to the whole of things. Now, rhetoric does that too, but in a really quite different way. I mean, the whole for rhetoric often, not necessarily, but often, is just whatever the situation is that you're
Right.
dealing with. Somebody's got a problem, whether it's in a literary text or in real life, or but it's holistic. I think it's about embracing the whole situation. Rhetoric defined by Aristotle as the discovery of all of the available means of persuasion. So my word "all" was partly owed to that. But if you think about it, you never have all of the available means of persuasion, or if you do, you don't know it because there's nobody there saying, "Oh, okay, that's it, that's all." That doesn't exist. And even if you had all, even if there actually was nothing more to say, it's unlikely that you would. Everybody's always got something else to add. Um, so rhetoric is involved in that at all. Um, it seems to be a big gap between rhetoric and philosophy. And of course, the tradition from Plato on has often played it that way, but not always. Um, Certainly, Aristotle made room for rhetoric in
Mm.
effectively kind of public discourses, particularly like politics and law. But beyond that, someone like Cicero takes this notion of persuasive talk and a kind of availing yourself of the full gamut of arguments and all stylistic devices in order to reach the heart and minds of audiences. But what Cicero does is he makes it kind of the method. I mean, he recognizes that there are maybe other methods, but what he's interested in is using the method of rhetoric to answer any kind of a question. So that already is a kind of aspiration to do philosophic works. Now, Cicero is not particularly held in very high regard as a philosopher, but McKeon, from whom I draw
Mm.
what I think is just an ocean of ideas, thought very well of Cicero in the sense of he draws from everybody, but to get his pluralism going, he draws kind of from the four causes of Aristotle. Remember the efficient, material, formal, and final causes, and then he sifts that through Cicero's stases, his
Mm.
four issues. Is it? What is it? What's it like? And how do we adjudicate it? Um, Cicero says, look, if you're going to have a law case, you're going to have those four. You can't have one without those four. It's constitutive. And what McKeon does is he says, okay, but we don't have to confine that to law cases. We can talk about anything, by using those four, I'll call them topics because that's really what they are. They function like topics. Um, for McKeon, he's not a philosopher he's not an ontologist. He's not asking questions about being. I think he'd like to do that I think he wished he lived in another time and place and would have been a leading ontologist. But what his argument has been, and I think is very persuasive, is look, we live in a time, like it or not, where ontology and epistemology just don't have very much standing in the disciplines. I mean, there are plenty of people who do it, they should do it, nothing wrong with doing it, but it's a hard sell to start with first principles out of somebody's ontology. That's a hard sell. McKean says we're in a time of conflicting perspectives and voices. This is just our situation right now. And the problem that we have is not that there's no truth or that you can't find it, but that it's very difficult to pursue it in this morass of voices, most of whom are not listening to the other person. Reasonably enough, you get into your thing and it's all you can do to figure out what you're talking about, much less the other guy. McKeon's got a very high bar. But meanwhile, there's a lot of, to me, endless, pretty fruitless argument in all the disciplines. People arguing back and forth because they just don't understand where the other person is coming from. So McKeon's argument is we can use rhetoric to get clarity about these different perspectives. Rhetoric can be used just to sharpen what each person is saying so that we get a cleaner debate. Or, you want to clash? Great, let's clash. But let's clash knowing what we're clashing about and understanding our terms and where the other guy's coming from. And I think that's a really great, profound insight. And is to me, the most plausible basis for thinking nowadays. I don't think it's always going to be like that. I don't doubt for a moment that ontology and epistemology will swing back and have their day, and this pluralism will look generous and so on, but will fade in the light of new knowledge about this, that, and the other thing. Newman, when I did my chapter on the idea of a university and really tried to figure out what he was talking about, he never says pluralism or things like that, but he's a pluralist. And he's a pluralist who is thinking rhetorically with the notion that in 100 years, we may need to think differently. We'll have to put these concepts together differently because people will change. That's a rhetorical thinker. That's somebody who says there's going to be a time when rhetoric is no longer that particularly pertinent or powerful. That makes sense. If there really are plural ways of doing things, really, which is what rhetorically a pluralist holds, that look, there are roughly determinate number of plausible ways that philosophy has developed over the last 2,000 years, and we can get a rough beat on those. And McKeon's insight is he uses what he calls the principle of indifference. He says it doesn't really matter if you do philosophy rhetorically, or he'll say semantically, but as a language philosopher of one kind or another, it doesn't matter if you do it that way or if you do it the way Aristotle did it and Plato. It doesn't really matter because we're all talking about the same world. And each has its own way in, and each one talks about the whole. So the trick then is how do you get them to communicate to each other out of these different systems? The systems are incommensurable, but I don't think they're incomparable. Rhetorically, they're not incomparable.
Well, I mean, I would contend that this has been the spirit of rhetoric from early on, right?
Yeah.
And so I almost take offense that rhetoric would somehow not be needed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's right.
But I wanted to make a point there again, just coming back to like, because any person, let's say a person who's in a particular view that they're existing in its whole. It's dealing with the world. And for that person to discover that there is a possibility of pluralism in itself, just the discovery of that someone else might actually be dealing effectively with the world, but in a whole other way that doesn't look like to them the way the world shows up for them, right?
That's right.
Is itself explosive. I would say at the level of who we are, what does it take to make that transition? Again, I'm coming back to education, to, well, how do you do that? How does the pedagogy of
Yeah.
what we're talking about allow for those kinds of encounters that open up this pluralistic realm?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just
Well, that's right. Pedagogically, that's a really hard nut to crack. As I say, McKeon has got an impossible bar to meet. Um, for what it's worth, my teachers who studied with McKeon, I've heard this now or read it from several different people who I admire and respect deeply. And for what it's worth, compare McKeon to Kant.
Hmm.
Now, it's like, what? We have this Kant in our midst and we don't know it? Because he's not deeply read even among rhetoricians and philosophers. There are no doubt a lot of different reasons for that. But all you have to do is pick up the books of his classes that he taught. There's one on the social sciences out, and there's one on the natural sciences, and in the works is one in humanities. Just pick up one of those other two, social sciences or natural sciences. He's talking extemporaneously. And when you read what it is he's saying extemporaneously, well, I've never seen the likes of it.
mm, mm.
I mean, a lot of his books are that way. I'm not making comparisons. I'm just saying that everybody was in awe
Mhm.
of McKeon. Yeah.
I wonder, just kind of extend this thread that of Drew, your question that what's remarkable to me in reading through your work, and it requires patience and time, in an education in a truly kind of educational way. That as I mentioned, I'm not a specialist, and so I'm in need of education in philosophical pluralism and the sort of rhetorical kind of reconsideration that you're bringing to it. But I think the book demands it, even of those who might be more specialized in that field, because it demonstrates the kind of pluralism that you're seeking to argue for. And so one way, I mean, there are different ways to think about that. Just an incredible range of references. I felt like I needed to recount some of this in my review of 25 pages of a bibliography. That's after all the notes, just hundreds and hundreds of notes, all of them rich and kind of worth going back to, and 600 plus pages of text and all. Your title sort of is maybe the best way at this, which is all in all, followed by the qualifying phrase more or less. So, I think this might be a good place to dig in there. What are the challenges of sort of that qualification? What do they represent for writing and kind of reading philosophy and criticism? That
Yeah.
everything is continually qualified by that.
That's a good question, and it ties into Drew's question about pedagogy, which I never really answered. Where I was going with that, but this allows me to bring them together, is that
Yeah.
yeah, more or less, from Aristotle's rhetoric, two of the most important common topics. In other words, concepts that you're going to deal with in any rhetorical situation is possible and impossible. Is something possible? And it's always an arguable matter. Or is
Mhm.
it impossible? We don't mean logically impossible or empirically impossible. We mean, can I argue that it's possible or
Yeah.
impossible? On the one, and then the other one is more or less. So with the pedagogy question, where I was going with that is McKeon has such a high bar. Uh, it's almost impossible to read him and not want to shoot yourself or just throw it all up and say, forget it. I can't even begin to think my way through this. But if you remember more or less, then we're back on Earth. Even McKeon is more or less, he's a human being. He's not a god. That's where we live. We live in more or less. And when it comes to teaching, um, for me, the first place to start would be my little slogan these days is the phrase forward to the basics. We need to go forward to the basics, which means get back to the basics, but it's not the old basics, it's the basics rethought for our time. And if you remember more or less, then, we can't create little McKeons in grade school and high school and college and even graduate school. Nobody is a McKeon. No, I don't know anybody who can do that. Even my teachers who I admired so much, who are really good at it, were in awe of that. So, but if you remember more or less, then it's like, well, wait a minute. What are those basics? You go back to that, and you can do that in a systematic way through grade school and high school and college. It's a shift from majoring in a disciplinary subject matter, astronomy, physics, psychology, to what? To a discipline graduated study that gets you deeper and deeper and deeper into what can be called grammar, rhetoric, and dialectic. How do you do that? Man, that's a tough one. Institutionally, I think it's maybe impossible these days. I don't know. But I have always believed that the way forward is to get back to these disciplines. It doesn't mean ignoring subject matter. Obviously, that's where everything is parked. But there must be a way to create enough people who know how to teach other teachers how to construct curricular pathways that will get somebody better and better and better. We do it in rhetoric. So how do you convince the rest of the college that I'm promoting rhetoric not because I want you to be a rhetorician, but because rhetoric allows me to give the fullest possible respect to what you guys do, understood as a part of a whole. That's a hard sell. Even McKeon failed at selling it at Chicago, and he was very influential in the college, in the so-called Robert Hutchins College in the 40s and 50s. It was really driven, I think, largely by McKeon. But even then, people they weren't even in Chicago, which was kind of known then for being a really open-minded intellectual place. My understanding is that their conversations and their discussions eventually just didn't really go anywhere because probably there just wasn't enough people around who could put it all together or something, or I don't know.
Really
But
fascinating.
that's
Yeah.
sobering.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
that's
how,
sobering.
because I could see in the classroom, it's possible to exercise the method, right,
Right,
of inquiring into a realm called a topic. Like,
right.
like I tell my students, for instance, just as an example, just to maybe cut back to this, what the heck a topic is like, so if someone becomes enters a realm called love as a topic, let's say, you're going to also have everything that's not love, right? And
Right. You
so,
got to
and it,
distinguish it from it.
right. So then basically, so if someone sort of invents for themselves this realm that isn't just the inherited common, what we would call the leftovers, the what I call the inventory of our culture about what that is, but to kind of own for themselves what this is, to become an adventurer in this realm, to discover all the places where it isn't, uh, given by the light that's shining from the topic itself, right?
Mm.
And that this is sort of but it's not like a program. I can't make you, anybody, but it can happen in a conversation in the classroom.
Yeah,
And what you're saying is like, how does it happen between disciplines? How does it happen between,
right.
what is this possibility of rhetoric?
Right.
Why should I care about that
And
when,
of course, turf battles are built into the structure of our
yeah,
institutions. It's a part of what it is to be in one department and not another, is to kind of fight and defend and get the money for your department. That's all perfectly reasonable things to do. But, the unintended consequence is that we get siloed into these different places. And, people become brilliant as a physicist, but get them to start talking about religion. I'm painting
right?
with
No,
a
yeah, yeah,
pretty broad
totally.
brush here. They don't know what they're talking about. It's like, that's not right. That I think it was Newman, or maybe it was Wittgenstein, but they both had versions of this. Said the problem is that people have too one-sided a diet of reading,
Hmm.
and to me that in a way says it all. That goes back to how I wrote this book, Sean,
Yep.
and your question,
Yep.
your side of this question. And that is, to me, if you're going to be a rhetorician, if you're going to be anybody, but if you're going to be a rhetorician, you really, really, really want to pay attention to the way you write in particular. And for me, writing, even with the Newman book, it was, uh, I'm not saying I'm a great stylist or anything like that. In fact, I'm not even particularly thinking about style. What I'm thinking about is the composition of the book. And, and, a lot of books really are kind of chapters put together, and it's great. It does what the author wants, and everybody's happy. But I never did it that way. I always wanted to take the reader through an experience
Hmm.
Hmm.
where you start here and you go through here and then you get here. And when you look back, you've been somewhere. Now, I don't plan this out consciously. I mean, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I write endless outlines of parts of the. So, but intuitively, what I'm after is I want to set it up so that the reader has to think kind of aside beside me,
Hmm.
because they don't need to be necessarily thinking about the exact things I'm thinking. You can hear about what I'm thinking, but also kind of work the material and think about what you want to think about. And so that's what uh, 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 that's what I'm after, is to create that experience and to have written a book that is more than a body of knowledge. It's an example of how to do this kind of work.
I
That
think,
to me is
yeah,
that's everything to me.
I think that characterizes well what your book has achieved. You meant and on that topic, but also you mentioned physicists a moment ago. I one of many fascinating excursions for me, and this relates to the topics. David Bohm, the quantum physicist,
Yeah,
the concept, so it led me to his work. I've now read
yeah, yeah.
as
He's
much
great.
of that book as I could. But the Rayo mode, I mean, I think you do some wonderful work there, not just exploring an example, but then bringing it into this larger, and I think if I'm remembering correctly, even sort of use it to rethink the topics as a verb, right? As not as a static location, but a
Yeah,
verb, this kind of flowing location. If you could say more about that, I highly recommend among
yeah,
many parts of this book for readers to go there. And
yeah. Drew, you might want to look at Bohm because
Yeah.
he's got several books. He worked with Einstein, so I can't begin to follow him in that realm. But he's what you could call an environmentalist thinker or an ecological thinker. That
yeah,
is, he thinks of wholes. He's thinking holistically. He's not an analytic thinker the way Aristotle is. He's like Plato. He's not like Aristotle. And that's a paradigm shift. I mean, everybody, if you go in along in the disciplines, everybody is doing that. So his doing it in physics and quantum physics and the rest, um, is eye-opening for those of us who can't follow very well to realize that, oh, you can kind of think this way as a scientist as well. It isn't confined to the humanities. It helps bridge the gap between the humanities and the sciences. I was going somewhere with that, and I just lost my thread.
Well, a topical reasoning is present regardless of your discipline. And I think
Yeah,
that's connecting back to what we were saying before too. Like,
yeah. You can think about anything rhetorically. It doesn't mean that rhetoric is going to necessarily show you very much. I mean, we have the rhetoric of science, and I've read in that. I haven't read all that deeply, but it certainly tells us great stuff. But it doesn't tell you about the equational, you know, mathematical work of Einstein. I don't think topics is going to do much for that.
hmm.
Maybe it is. I hear in advanced levels of mathematics, it gets very open, but I can't follow that. Um, yeah, you can think about anything rhetorically.
Well, I think that just to dig with in deeper what Sean was pointing to, I think is like the term relevate or procept or pericept, right? Like pointing to this quality of topics that they only exist in the moment that we're seeing and performing in the world of the topic. And then as
Yeah.
soon as we're not, then they're not there.
Yeah,
And
that
yeah.
we were talking earlier. This notion of a topic is almost impossible for me. I always felt like in the classroom. Um, Once you try to put your hands on some topics, they like just crumble into ash or they disappear in a thin smoke. There's, topics are nothing more than kind of terms that we recognize. Uh, um, what makes them different as concepts from other kinds of concepts is that, you mentioned love. So, okay, I want to write a paper about love. Maybe I'll go to Freud and find a really good definition of libido and love and all of that stuff. That's working at the non-rhetorical end of things. You're trying
Hmm.
to find
Hmm. Hmm.
fixities and causalities and fixed patterns, things that won't wobble on you. That's not how a rhetorician thinks about love. A rhetorician asks, Sean, what do you think of love? Drew, what do you think of love? Here's another definition of love. Let's talk about it. What is that? Well, you and I, we all know something about the concept. We know something about the reality. Any person will know things. In other words, it's not an empty concept. It's not just vacuous. That would truly be useless if love just meant nothing. So it's got a lot of potential. It's got a lot of event potential. That's a Bakhtinian
Hmm.
term. He talks about
Hmm.
the event potential of literature. And that's what topics are. They're all potential. They're concepts. I like something like a procept, not a concept. A concept, you grasp it, you're with it, you
The
got it.
griffa.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah.
grip it.
But a procept is I've got something, but it really doesn't function very well until I'm looking forward to see how it might change or open up things, or I look around it to see uh, how its neighbors affect it. So it's a concept, but it's I wanted to distinguish it. To think topically is to think something like open-mindedly, but in a disciplined way. Open-mindedness can just be, you got your head full of stuff and you don't know what it is, which is the way most of us live most of the time. It's not very many places where I feel like I've got a disciplined take on what the topics are in the discussion. Most of the time, you're kind of flailing for them. But they're there, and we use them. You want to buy a used car, you know what topics to go through to buy a car. Once you get the experience, an 18-year-old is usually drawn up short because they don't have any experience with it. Not because they're stupid, they just haven't dealt with it yet. But by 25, they know all about buying cars or whatever it is. So topics are kind of everything, but they're also kind of nothing. It's
Mhm.
like, you can find lists, as you guys well know, throughout the history of rhetoric, of
Sure.
lists of topics. Um,
But they've been conceptualized by
They've
then.
been conceptualized as kind of a second order topics. They're topics lifted out of use and put there for you to see. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that um, if you want to be a rhetorician, you have to learn what those topics are and absorb them into your bloodstream so that there's a naturalness to it. Then, if you get stuck with an idea, you don't quite know what to do, then you can pull back and go, wait a minute. What topics what am I missing here? Or what have someone else done? No, I don't like that way of doing it. What would be that's how I did the epiphanic epideictic thing. I just felt my way. I took the what were effectively the topics of epiphany, and I tried to generate out for epideixis, making suitable changes and the rest. Um,
Mhm. And
that's
those are opposing terms and antithesis within a topical realm that
Yeah.
it.
Up to a point. You have to be real alive to what your problem is and what you're trying to do because these relationships, what's a procept compared to a concept, or you can put them in opposition, you can make them similarities, you can blend them together. That's the wonder of concepts is rhetorically they're in solution.
Mhm, mhm.
So getting good at that is not memorizing a bunch of lists of topics. I don't know anybody who's done that, really. I still have trouble identifying tropes because I never committed any of it to memory. I don't
Mhm.
need to commit it to memory. If I'm looking for tropes and want to deal with something, then I go look it up. And
Mhm.
that's the other thing with topics is you don't have to have all the topics at the ready. Who has that? You have to have access to them.
Mm.
Or you have to know where to go. A good lawyer reads all the law and so on. And then when a client comes in and they tell the problem, what they're listening for really are the topics. Possible trespass, assaults. But these are pretty open-ended concepts. Duty of care. Did they have a duty? You can define duty of care in black letter law, but that's not how a lawyer deals with it.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think for me, I've been thinking about heuristics and certainly topics, and you mentioned the Stacy's and actually I went back, Walter, to your teaching the topics, which may have been one of my starting points with your work, and I had forgotten
Yeah.
it's also about Wayne Booth, or was I think it was eventually
Yeah, I
published,
think
right?
yeah, it is about him.
Engages with Booth, but you mentioned there that the concept is an inquiry that's not reducible, and this is a specific term you use, algorithmic methods, and
Yeah.
more recently, I think for good reasons, we've all been thinking about algorithms and algorithmic methods, and certainly the latest version of algorithmic method, and so I've been preaching to my students. I use these terms very explicitly and to colleagues that we always use technologies and tools, but heuristics are better than algorithms in terms of open-endedness, right? If the algorithm is a predetermined outcome,
Yeah.
not only we're not gonna learn, but we're gonna reach bad conclusions. We're not gonna come to agreement,
Yeah, depending on the problem. Some problems require algorithms,
Yeah.
calculus. That's the tool of the trade. But the kinds of problems that we're preoccupied with, kind of existential problems in literature or in our lives or wherever, um, you can use algorithms, and I wouldn't bar using anything.
Mm.
A rhetorician uses everything if there's something that's useful.
Yeah.
But as a rule, as an algorithmic rule, algorithms are not the way to go
Yeah.
because for all the reasons that you said. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah, that's exactly right.
It's great. I've recently been thinking a lot about Goethe's Faust
Oh
and
yeah,
and Goethe's Mephistopheles as a personification of AI in our age, and the force that can supply everything and
that's interesting.
only gets your soul if you can't
Yeah,
think beyond the algorithm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, remember Faust was a developer. He was a
Yeah,
land developer. So
that's
it's
right.
all that thrust of grab, 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 build, 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 out, 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 more, more, more.
Yeah.
It's not more or less, it's more, more, more. Um, just as a side note, I've taught Faust just once or twice,
Ah,
and I came across, now I'm going to forget this, but some connection of Mephistopheles in German was connected to the name Jost.
no.
And so Mephistopheles and Jost were somehow connected, which I really loved, not because I'm a devil and want to destroy things, but because as a principle of nothing
Hmm.
that he is, nothing's got two sides to it. One is doom and destruction and the abyss, and the other side is it's the receptacle of everything.
Yeah. Nothing and
So,
everything.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, people make a big deal out of Goethe saying in having Faust say, not in the beginning was the word, but in the beginning was the deed.
Mm.
And of course, that is a significant change, and it opened up all kinds of stuff. But people are inclined to forget that deeds speak. Deeds.
Speech acts.
Well, no, 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 no. But even an
Yeah.
action
Right. Right.
speaks for itself,
Mm. Hmm.
in the same way that a verbal act is a deed. It's an action. So one doesn't rule out the other. In fact, I think they go together very.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, yeah,
Walter, I have to I wanted to touch base on so the third part of the book gets into kind of applied readings of the applied applications of the philosophy to a range of texts. One of which is a text you tell us you've taught many years, 12 Angry Men, the Sidney
right,
Lumet film, and and again, there's plenty to read and enjoy from the book, but for me, this chapter was worth the price of admission. I just found it
great,
really compelling. Uh,
great, great.
you can tell that you've given this film a lot of engagement in the classroom and not just not
Yeah,
just in your thinking. And so, and it certainly relates to a kind of the power, the topical thinking as a resource for.
yeah,
So I wonder if you could just for those who don't know the film, you should go out and take a look at it, but then also read this chapter. What
yeah.
is it about the film that's important?
Yeah. Yeah, that was a great story for me coming to that film. And because on its surface, it's a 1956 film. It's Sidney Lumet's first film. It was based on a teleplay, I think, by Reginald Rose. And, kind of sophisticated people who know Sidney Lumet and admire him. I'm thinking some of my teachers. At first glance, or an even second and third glance, 12 Angry Men is great. Filmic work aside, but it kind of can sound like a civics lesson.
Yeah.
Oh, I get it. Henry Fonda's the hero, and everybody else is more or less, if not a jerk, kind of out of it. And he shows them how to think. And isn't our judicial system wonderful? That's an easy take. And I suspect over the years, particularly back in the 50s and 60s, people took it that way. But when I saw it, and again, this to me, it's always an intuitive, gradual thing. But number one, it became, it's pretty obvious for a rhetorician. Oh, this is a great way to talk about rhetoric. Law is a great way to teach rhetoric, law cases. Or in this film, it's a deliberation and they're all sitting around. This is what they're doing. They're coming up with arguments and they're countering them and they're not listening and they're doing all these things rhetorically. So on the face of it, it's just a perfect vehicle to teach rhetoric. A vehicle. But the more I looked at it, and I must have seen this movie certainly 20 times over the last 30 years. And I couldn't recommend it more highly. The 1956 version, I hear that I haven't seen a later version of the last 10 years or something. And I have no desire to see it. I can't imagine it touching what Lumet does. But in any event, the more I studied it, the more it occurred to me, when you really listen to these guys, it's not just the arguments they're making about the possible um, uh, patricide that this kid is said to have committed. That's a big part of it because that's what they're there to argue over. But the more you listen to these guys, the more you realize how much they're talking about talk. They have a lot to say about talking
Hmm.
and listening and being together in a group. And when I saw that, then I realized, oh, there's a that's the deeper level of this movie. This isn't, it's wonderfully entertaining as a whodunit, as a judicial courtroom movie, you name it, a civics lesson. It's got all of that. But deeper than that, I was still interested in the movie, and I began to realize what I'm interested in is how self-aware the director, the writer, the actors are about what it is to think, to what it is to speak in order to create the world for the person you're talking to. The world comes into being as these guys work it out. I mean, they're talking about a world out there, but the whole point about a law case is that you've got two competing stories about what the world is. Um, and at this deeper level, it struck me that I don't know if the director or the writer were doing this consciously, but that this was a study in rhetoric, at this kind of quote unquote theoretical second order level. When I went finally to got a book by Lumet about his films, about 12 Angry Men, at least this is what I remember. He had one thing to say about when somebody asked him, and his response was, listen, listen. So it's really easy to watch this film and not listen because, I know what's going on. They're arguing about the case. And I don't know. I'm trying to follow the arguments, and it doesn't matter if I follow them or not because it's very entertaining and these guys are great actors and it's delightful. So it's really easy, like in real life, not to listen to what you're saying, what the other person is saying, and to blow right by it. And for my money, that's what makes that one of the reasons it makes it a great film. It's great acting, all that great camera work, everything is brilliant. But in addition, it's an extremely thoughtful, self-reflective work. Author and director aside, I don't really have to know what they were thinking about. I can show you where it's being thoughtful.
Hmm. Right.
So, yes. So to me, that was, I've also taught legal reasoning. Law and a film like that, and there are other films, of course, that are also great vehicles.
Boston
Um,
Legal.
there are a lot of them. Uh, those are great vehicles for teaching rhetoric,
Hmm.
particularly legal reasoning. My students, it was always a self-selecting group, I think, that, were pre-law types and ready to hotshot it through some case. And it always came very sobering to them. It's like I always likened it was like holding back the horses, tight on the reins because they wanted to charge ahead into this material. It's like, wait a minute. It was all I could do to say, wait a minute, listen to the statute. Do not walk on the grass. Now, what does that mean? What if an MIT student creates a hoverboard that has a toxic, atomic waste coming out of it and leaves big strips through the lawn? Has he walked on the grass? Oh, well, then they go back for, well, what about the guy who was running? He defends himself. I didn't walk on the grass. I was running the whole time. That kind of thing.
Hmm.
Listen to how we're using the words.
Hmm. Hmm.
A word like that, walk, for certain purposes is a concept, but it really operates as a paracept in a thing like,
And
do
walk
not
is
walk
just
on the grass.
it's a metonym for the whole. Right.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
That's right.
great. It's really
You
great.
got to take it in, and that's hard for younger students to do. That's when you got the horses reared in and got them, then it's like, oh shit, oh, I see. And I always love teaching law cases. What it's like to be a lawyer, I don't know, but intellectually, law is really fascinating.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, to come back, I mean, just that word listen again. Because I wonder if you've if this is part of what you're grappling with too, is that, there's ways that I would say that we listen, but we do so mechanically or I would say inauthentically. It's like not really my listening, but it's just sort of like the trained way of interacting with the generic
Right,
convention, so to speak, right? And
right.
so the first step of listening is noticing, oh, that I'm listening that way.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's the
then
first step.
and then because that's what I'm hearing in Lumet's injunction, listen, like notice,
Yeah,
because I think the thing that he's saying is you are these dudes. You
that's right.
are the 12
That's right.
angry guy. It's not, these are
Yeah.
not, you're
All
not.
these ordinary people, that's who we are.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
this is how we talk most of the time.
Hmm, hmm.
Um, and it's easy to hate the one character or another, pretty raging bigots and some nasty work there. But really, we're all of those people.
Yeah, yeah.
If the stories about my not listening, rife in my family were let loose, I'd have a big A on my chest for asshole or something. You're not listening. And when my wife gets really frustrated, she'll say, "Listen for the feeling." And
Oh, that's
yeah,
great.
that's something a rhetorician is supposed to know.
Mm.
And you know,
And or yeah, and we do, but knowing doesn't always make a
yeah,
difference. It's the
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't.
I wonder. I don't know if this is too much, Walter, but I mean, I see the book also telling its audience, or maybe the academics in the audience, philosophy and literary critics and theorists, to we've had what is it now, 50 years of the linguistic rhetorical turn, and you're sort of saying, listen, but we haven't been listening to the language. We've just sort of been using the terms of rhetoric, but
Yeah,
that they're in need of being reclaimed or maybe listened to.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
This holds for anybody in the humanities. I mean, it's a commonplace that essays in scholarly journals, on the whole, are pretty badly written,
Hmm.
turgid, not that to me is really, really a serious thing to say
Mm.
against
Mm.
academics. It's
Hmm.
like, wait a minute. Um, I'm not saying anything like, you're in physics or you're in sociology and you want to, make your style pretty, and it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with learning how to pay attention to the experience that you're creating for the reader.
Yes, yes.
So that, and of course, it's not just the writer's fault. It's not just that these people are dumb and I'm not dumb because I try to do it differently. The whole system is set up against what we might call style
Mm.
or composition. Um, but in the most serious ways of using those words, that's everything. I
Mm.
remember my dissertation director, who I just admired no end. He really had read McKeon. And what was so brilliant about him is he was very different a thinker than I was, but he knew exactly what I was doing and just helped me to be me
Mm.
without, because he knew what he was and he knew the difference. Um, I was going somewhere with that. It's that reflective ability to ask, what do I want to accomplish as a humanist? And the university, God save the university, has been built on a paradigm of science for a long time. Things are changing and they'll continue to change. But the rewards, the accolades, the money has gone to certain places and not to others. And in those worlds, this idea of style and rhetoric, and it's like, oh Christ, it couldn't be worse
Hmm.
because they don't understand what it is we're talking about. And this is the censure, I think. They don't understand because the rhetoricians haven't done a good job either explaining it or better exemplifying it. If so many academics are writing badly, I'm not aware that rhetoricians and their ilk are writing great. I see a lot of essays in QJS and elsewhere where I just want to go, if you're going to do rhetoric, pay
Yeah.
attention.
Listen.
Listen, listen to yourself.
Listen for the feeling.
But again, this is not an attack on people. It's,
Yeah.
this is a very systemic, institutionalized, long-standing intellectual story that we're all a part of and grew up in, and we're all doing our best to do and to contribute. So, it's one thing to say a rhetorician is, God, that's turgid and terrible. However, the ideas I can pluck out of it are very interesting, and so there is a contribution,
Right.
but it doesn't exemplify. It doesn't give a good example to younger people that this is how to think better,
Hmm.
writing this way.
Hmm.
So, my dissertation director said, really, this is we kept in touch and stayed friends. Much later, he said, well, really what we do is composition. Now, of course, that includes teaching comp,
Mhm.
running comp programs, which, by the way, ought to be supplemented by public speaking programs, but that's another story.
Right.
He meant that's what thinking is. You're composing this way, that way, this way, that way. Bentham does it that way. Locke does it that way.
Hmm.
Descartes does it that way. Tolstoy does it that way. And you can get better at recognizing what it is each person is doing, even though it's very different from what you do. There's no reason. If we're all pretty much reciprocally equal, it doesn't really matter what way the other guy is doing it. You just want him to do it well. Want her to do it well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's also possible to learn through emulation. That's another, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Walter Ong, for me, was always a really good writer. There was a guy in the French department at UVA, as I was coming along before I got tenured, who wrote these thin books. And believe me when I say it has always been a dream of mine to write, a 120-page book with the kind of elegance and economy and grace that he had. And I said to him once, I said, I just really admire the way you write. And that brought a smile to him. But I think he was actually, now that I think about it, a University of Chicago product. But I think he recognized what I was saying. It wasn't like, gee,
Hmm.
it was, you really know how to put it together tightly and without waste and gracefully and engagingly. And I have an experience when I would read a book of his. Um, it's rare, like all really great things. That's pretty hard to do. It's pretty rare. And I just think it should be the ideal that we're all striving at.
Yeah.
But
What was it?
I don't think we are.
What was it Montaigne said? I sat down to write you a short letter, but I didn't have the time.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, right. Exactly. That's me. I mean, all in all, more or less, was supposed to be a short book. It was contracted as a 150-page book.
No way. No
I'm
way.
telling you, I'm serious. I aspire to that. That was my aspiration, but I don't think I'm capable of it.
Hmm.
Had you always conceived it in three parts, or is that what it grew
No,
into? Yeah.
no. The two final chapters on the Elizabeth Bishop poems I had written already. I had done an early thing on 12 Angry Men, but it wasn't good. And then I had been thinking about Edith Wharton's novel Ethan Frome for 20 years.
Hmm.
Because I taught American Studies thing. And it always just bugged the hell out of me. I knew something was off. The secondary criticism avoided all of the really central, they're aware of having avoided the central issues. The people like Lionel Trilling, who had written on it, who's great. I thought, and it took me just off and on. I wasn't thinking about it for 20 years. It took me a long time to go, oh, I see what I think is going on in that. No wonder I've had such trouble because it was a very naughty kind of thing. Um, how did I get to that? What was I didn't listen properly to the question that led me into that.
Well, the part one on philosophy and
That's right, right.
more of that.
That's right.
The
That's right. So
disconcordance of our language games.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right, right.
So I had stuff in those studies of texts, and two had been more or less written, but the rest just kind of grew. It's like I knew I wanted to try to understand McKeon better because he's so difficult. I had read Robert Brandom, a philosopher, also after the linguistic turn, who does things very differently, analytically, out of the analytic tradition, not our hermeneutic rhetorical tradition. And when I first encountered his work, I thought, what is he talking about? It took a
Yes.
long time to get and to appreciate it. It's like, oh, I see what you're doing. That's great. Then I track down what I think are mistakes or promises that don't cash out. I hope I'm right about them. But boy, the last thing I'd want to do is get rid of Brandom, even though he's so radically different. I don't want to get rid of anything. That's a very Newmanian attitude. Newman's attitude was always the more the merrier. Bring them on. You can do anything you want,
Mhm.
just so long as you're doing it as well as you can, or as well as it ought to be done.
Hmm.
And that is my flaw. Yeah, I am a pluralist. In this time and age, rhetoric is a way of saying there are a lot of ways to get at the truth. Um, and it kind of doesn't matter which angle you're coming from. I don't think the Platonic program would have to be reinvented, but Plato had a very sensible way of thinking about the world. I mean, the idea of ideas that he had, that makes perfectly good sense. I mean, speaking of love, sometimes I'd use as an example, think about your, in a few years you're going to get married, and you want, what is it? What kind of a marriage do you want? And what you're developing is some kind of ideal. Now, you may be fully aware that you're not going to reach that ideal, or at any given moment in a marriage, the two haven't reached the ideal. But the idea that there is an idea out there that regulates and shapes reality, that seems to me to be a very reasonable way to think about the world.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, listen,
Yeah.
it is now we've gone over our hour, which is
Yeah.
great, and it's been a fantastic conversation. Like really,
I,
really great. And I
I
know we could
really,
probably go on for a couple more hours
yeah,
if we
yeah,
wanted
I
to.
could.
I could.
I really want to thank you for having me, both of you, and yeah, I'm always amazed that anybody reads these books. I think that's a common thing among academics that you send these things out there and you have no idea. But so thank you
Hmm.
for
Hey,
taking the time.
Well,
enjoy
yeah,
it,
and
Walter.
just the labor of creating it is just, I mean, it is awe-inspiring. So,
Well,
just
you
thanks
know it
for,
as well as I do.
yeah,
Anybody who does this stuff, I always say, you want to write a book, don't write a book unless you have to write a book.
that's right.
Because it's not what you think it's going to be.
That's right. It's got to
The
just,
romantic notion of, I've written a book. And
no, no,
my
it's being,
experience is it's really not that.
you got to be you. The book has got to write you. Yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah,
book has
yeah,
kind of got to write you. That's right.
yeah, that's
And
right.
you have to feel that you're in arrears if you don't write it.
Yeah,
At
yeah.
least that's how I always felt. It's like I always wanted to write only what I had to write,
Hmm.
within a book and just the books themselves. It's like at some point, that's how it happened. It's like I got to figure out how this all adds up.
It's
Yeah.
great.
But thank you again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Enjoyed.
Awesome. Any last words for
Yeah.
you, Sean?
Just to say thank you as well. I mean, I think this is, it was a very meaningful experience for me. As I mentioned, I took my
I'm
time
glad.
with it. I really,
I'm glad.
I took a quick look and said, okay, this is going to take me some time. It's not a 125 page
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
But I had an instinct, and knowing your prior work, that I wanted to spend time with it, and it fulfilled the time that I spent. So
I'm really glad.
yeah, I appreciate it.
That's what you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
righty. Well, in another time and place.
Yeah.
Yeah.